2020 was an absolute garbage fire year. 2021 was a marginal improvement. I spent last year going through my backlog and finally beating all the games I had been neglecting forever. I've spent such a long time lamenting the fact that there aren't a ton of great games on the horizon that I really care about that I completely forgot about all the amazing games that already exist that I haven't even touched. I barely even scratched the surface yet, and already I've found a ton of excellent stuff. But I've also found some things that I wasn't a huge fan of. Yooka-Laylee was a game that I played for 5 hours when it first came out, and then I never touched it again until I finally decided to beat it last year. This is not a terrible game or anything like that, but it was very underwhelming and not quite as polished or well thought out as I would have hoped for. Earthbound and Mother 3 are two of my favorite games of all time. Mother 1, on the other hand, is... The lore is really cool and the music is fantastic, and it's got some of that funky mother dialogue you come to expect from the other games, but the random encounters and NES era bullshit kind of torpedoed my passion for it. Then there's Borderlands. I thought I liked Borderlands for much of my life, but this year I suddenly had an epiphany and realized that these games are kinda crappy. I mean, it's cookie clicker with a gun and with sometimes funny but often annoying characters. That's how I feel anyway. I also beat Quake 2 finally, and I gotta say, this certainly is an old FPS game from 1997. And that's awesome. Smash finally ended on a high note. I mean, it wasn't really a high note for me, but it was for a lot of people, so that's pretty sweet. So that's the too long don't give a shit version of my 2021. But if you do give a shit, stay tuned, cause I'm gonna give you the rundown of my 10 favorite games I played last year. I'm still delving through the backlog, so not all of these will have come out last year, but I've given extra consideration to the ones that did, just because. So with all that out of the way, it's time to watch something you will most assuredly agree with wholeheartedly. Cyberpunk 2077 was a sour turd for a lot of people. It was made by CD Projekt Red, a studio that got famous in 2015 for making The Witcher 3. The funny thing is, I didn't actually like Witcher 3 very much, so I had neither the trust in nor the attachment to CD Projekt Red that everyone else did when Cyberpunk was released, and I think this played a role in mitigating my disappointment when the game came out and wasn't finished. Even a year after release, it's not been brought up to where it probably should be or where it was promised it would be. It still runs like dog ass on my computer and is riddled with bugs and is in many ways less technically sound, meticulously detailed, or intensely immersive than open world games that came out several years ago. This was such a monumental disaster that it actually made Krobcat crawl out of his cave in the middle of the woods to make a 41-minute video on it. That's how you know you fucked up. Between poor management, fake trailers, and overhyped promotional material that was largely just straight up lies, Cyberpunk 2077 pretty much personifies every single thing wrong with the video game industry right now. That being said, I did actually like this game quite a bit. At a fundamental level, Cyberpunk is a fun game. It's got enough fun weapons and stealth and hacking to keep me engaged for its big-ass runtime. Some guns can headshot people through 80 feet of reinforced concrete, which is supposedly one of the few things that really is a feature and not a bug. Hacking people's nanomachines and fucking with all the computers and devices, it really is a fun game. The characters and the world can be very impressive and feel very realistic and fleshed out when the game is functioning properly. It's not perfect and doesn't work properly all the time, but maybe, in 3 years when they finally fix everything and the game is only $30, you can buy it on Steam or wherever, and by that time, you might eventually be able to afford a computer that can actually run it properly. Half-Life is old. Really old. It's almost as old as me. And much like me, it hasn't aged gracefully in every respect. but what's remarkable is where it has. Half-Life has an impeccable atmosphere that, even today, can't be taken for granted. This is a game that understands the power of silence and ambience. Instead of constantly blasting loud-ass music all the time or interrupting the flow with annoying-ass cutscenes, Half-Life relies much more heavily on environmental storytelling. And the cutscenes are kind of built into the gameplay, but not in a Naughty Dog way where there's all this slow-ass walking that's linear and has no margin for error. It's 100% gameplay, except the important story beats happen as you're playing and in real time. To some extent, Half-Life storytelling is a bit of a lost art. You don't see this kind of thing as much anymore. But at the same time, it's not just a mindless shooting gallery. The game's world is complete and cohesive and feels like a real place that could actually exist. And it's combined with gameplay that's more deep and thoughtful than a lot of its contemporaries in even some modern games. I have it low on this list because being an older game, it is pretty janky still, but if you can get used to it, it will be very easy to see why this game is remembered so fondly. This is such an important game, and I believe everyone must try it at least once in their lives. Katamari Damacy is a bizarre Japanese PlayStation 2 game. Although it was re-released for modern hardware, I chose to play the PS2 version because that's the version I happen to own. Now, what you have to understand about the PS2 is that this is an absolute garbage piece of hardware. Although everyone seems to have fond memories of this thing, all the memories I have are, oh, the disk drive is fucked, or oh, it can't read memory cards, or oh, all the controllers are broken even though it worked perfectly fine 3 minutes ago, hey, yo, hey. Just for reference, I own 2 PS2s. Neither of them work, and getting anything to run on either of them is a nightmare. For comparison, my Xbox, GameCube, and Dreamcast all still work perfectly, so yeah, good job Sony from 22 years ago. So was Katamari worth all of the trouble of getting it to just barely run on these busted PS2s? Not in the slightest, but it's still a pretty good game. There is something so primal and so innate about the desire to roll up the entire world and accumulate mass so you can just roll up bigger and bigger things. It has a real sense of progression where you're a tiny baby shit in the beginning, but by the end of the game you're basically God. I mean, look at me, I own everything. I own the police, I own the media, I own the government, I own the world, it's all mine! Oh shit. Sorry. In spite of its extremely hyperactive absurdity, there's a very wholesome and worldly backdrop to the whole thing. Even the end credits screen has you rolling around the earth and picking up all the countries of the world. Somehow I missed Canada. I don't even know how. It's the second largest landmass. You'd think I'd pick it up by accident. I finally went back and beat GTA Vice City. It's another older game that hasn't aged perfectly, but that didn't actually end up mattering to me because everything about this game is so endearing. It has a much more over-the-top and cartoonish atmosphere than Rockstar's newer games, on top of being a lot more gameplay focused as opposed to being a much more scripted, hand-holdy movie-like experience. The feeling you get from exploring and adventuring around Vice City is absolutely captivating. I genuinely enjoyed just wandering around the world and circling the entire map in a helicopter to see everything that there was to see. I didn't think this game would stand the test of time, and in some respects, maybe it didn't, but if you can have a little patience for PS2 era bullshit, you will fall in love with this aged and sharp cheddar cheese of a game like I have. I've always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with the Uncharted series. On the one hand, they've always had fun stories with very human characters and phenomenal presentation and set pieces, but the gameplay is incredibly shallow and the shooting feels weak as hell, like I'm using a frickin' Nerf gun. What's great about Uncharted 4 though is that Naughty Dog actually tried this time, which is why this is the first game in the series where shooting people actually feels good and satisfying. They added in some stealth mechanics like tall grass and enemies losing you in the middle of a firefight, and they did all of that without sacrificing all the other stuff that makes Uncharted so great. It's the first Uncharted game with actual good gameplay, and that's not even to speak of the presentation, which still looks phenomenal, especially considering this game came out in 2016. This game will be 6 years old this year. If it still looks this good on a dumpy ass PS4, I cannot wait to see how it looks when the PC version launches. Wolfenstein: The New Order and New Colossus are two of the best FPS games I played in a long time. They can't live up to their sister series, but they're very close. You got stealth combat where you chuck knives at people and hack their limbs off with fire axes. You've got death metal combat where you dual wield heavy assault rifles and shit. The combat is so heavy and punchy, but the stealth is equally satisfying, and juggling these two different playstyles allows for a game that doesn't just feel like a one-trick pony. It feels strategic and somewhat thoughtful. Can I ask a question? Why is everyone out here buying a bullshit-ass Call of Duty game about Hitler 2 when New Colossus has been out for almost 5 years now? Do you people even know what you're doing? If I was God, I would just snap my fingers and replace every new Call of Duty with New Colossus. Super Mario Odyssey is a great return to form for 3D Mario. It traded out the short linear bursts of fun for a much more dynamic and liberating experience. I know a lot of people won't agree with this, but this is one of the best 3D Mario games for me. It's a love letter to longtime fans with all kinds of nods to previous titles, both in gameplay and world details. It's like a collage of bits and pieces of every 3D Mario game, and 2D for that matter, up to that point. It's such a densely packed game, you know what I'm saying? It's like mac and cheese with 3 pounds of ground beef mixed into it. What I'm saying is, it's real good. I've been playing Breath of the Wild on and off since release, but this was the year I actually decided to really delve into it. The game has a bit of a slow and underwhelming start, but there's a point where it starts to lure you in and then you just get completely lost in it. I'm talking unnaturally so. This game is phenomenal. I once played it for a straight 9.5 hour session. That's how good this game is. The atmosphere is some of the best in a video game. The world of every Zelda game is top notch. They always got that upbeat Hyrule Field music getting you pumped up for adventure. But Breath of the Wild traded out the upbeat soundtracks for a much more understated, subtle, and incredibly atmospheric score, letting the massive and detailed world speak for itself. Breath of the Wild is also an entirely player-directed experience. There are a number of tasks and puzzles, but the game doesn't hold your hand or restrict you from doing things the way you want. A lot of games have an extremely specific way for you to approach every single puzzle and situation. The easiest and most relevant example here would be the previous Zelda games where you get some item in a dungeon and that's the solution to every problem. Instead of doing that, Breath of the Void just gives you 6 really cool tools right at the beginning, and there's nothing forcing you to avoid going somewhere or doing something at your own discretion. If you want to go to the freezing ass cold mountain, yeah, you could look for warmer clothes first, or you can just load up on spicy fish and tough it out. The shrine puzzles will have a way that they kind of expect you to beat them, but if you have a better idea that you think might also work, the game won't force your hand into doing it the proper way, because, let's be real, there kinda isn't a proper way. As far as I'm concerned, this game and MGS5 are the kings of open world games, because they actually use the world to the advantage of the gameplay, instead of just being something that looks pretty. The only problem with Bowser's Fury is that in order to play it, you have to buy Super Mario 3D World, which is an 8-year-old Wii U game that only a company like Nintendo would have the audacity to charge full price for. Now, depending on who you ask, Super Mario 3D World on its own for full price is still a great deal. But if you know me, you know that I don't hold this game in as high esteem as everyone else seems to. But Bowser's Fury, on the other hand, well, this is the best thing I've played in 68 years. This is as close to my dream 3D Mario game as you can get. You have the mechanical versatility that's almost on par with Odyssey, mixed with extremely efficient pacing. It's just one giant world that you get to explore at your own pace and in any order you feel like. It doesn't hold your hand, but it still manages to lure you into new experiences at a very efficient pace that no other Mario game seems to quite be able to replicate. If the next Mario game is just a massive version of this, but with the more versatile movement of Odyssey, I will be the happiest person on earth. Metroid Dread is the greatest game I have played in 7 billion years. It's so captivating, it's so replayable, it's so polished and satisfying. There is nothing about this game that I don't like. Well, the Shine Spark is still a bitch, but if you can get past that, you will experience a wonderful reminder of why Metroid's fanbase remains as passionate and dedicated as it does today, because these games are just fucking incredible. It's that simple. I wasn't the biggest fan of the Metroid series before I played Dread, but now it's my third favorite series of all time. It is so goddamn good, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's polished, it's captivating, it makes you just want to keep delving further. It's got some of that classic Bush League Metroid game design, and it's honestly the most fun I've had with a game this year. My game of the year was a 2D platformer, and unlike Doom Eternal, which didn't win shit at the Game Awards in 2020, Dread actually did win something in 2021. So that's how you know it's good. I hope to God that Metroid carries on strong and that Metroid Prime 4 will actually be real, but until then, I will make you play this game if you don't do it yourself. Thanks for watching.